Hey, and good evening. This is Tiger. Hey, AJ, thank you for moderating the stream again. I still have to get used to this new intro of the game. I liked talking over the music at the beginning, and now there is no music anymore. Anyway, so after all, we are getting used to the new user interface for Train Sim World 3. We still have not all the routes that we had in Train Sim World 2, but from what I'm understanding, they are working on it. What I planned for today is driving really heavy and long trains in the American route Cajon Pass that comes with Train Sim World 3 Standard or Deluxe Edition. And what I thought we should try moving is a train. What did I pick? Did I pick cement or grain? I think I wanted to move grain. Let's just see in our indicator what we are doing here. G Houston. Grain. From Barstow to Victorville, then it must be later, then it must be grain train from Houston to San Diego. This is what I wanted to do. Let's have the dynamic weather on. Let's run in December, starting with clear weather, and jump into the route. This picture is very fitting. It belongs to the route. It shows the locomotive that we are going to drive. Not this one. This is an ICE1 from Kassel-Würzburg. That's not what we are doing. We are driving those extremely powerful and heavy trains. Before we start, just have a look at the trains from the outside. I will turn down the volume a bit so that I can hear myself talking better. If it is too soft music or sound wise, AJ, please tell me, then I will pump it up again. Yeah, here we are at, I think it was Victorville what they said, and trains of this kind is what are moved here. Many locomotives, multiple units, distributed power, meaning locomotives not only at the beginning of the train but also at the end or even in the middle. And as long that if you'd run those trains in Europe, you can actually span 2 or 3 countries easily. So the tip of your train could be in France, while the end of your train is in Belgium and the rest of your train is in Luxembourg or something like this. But here in the United States, this is totally not a thing that happens. Scarcely they do it like that. And what have we? We have a train with 4 locomotives at the beginning. Those locomotives are ES44 C4s. Actually written on this plate here, ES44 AC4s, meaning they are called Evolution series. They have 4,400 horsepower each. And at the end of our train there are more. This is just the tip. And at the end there are 3. So we have 7 locomotives actually in our consist to move those endless wagons full with grain. And if you look at our stat sheet, it is 14,309.5 tons. The really heavy consist that we moved in our PZBU stream from Dresden to Röderau, it weighed about a tenth of that, and it was heavy enough to control with one little Baureihe 143. I admit this, and we have 7 ES44 AC4s here. So a different story, and look how long this thing is. It's given in feet, 5,752 feet. There are 3 feet to 1 yard. That means that is something close of 2,000 yards, and that is something between 1.5 and no, not 1.5. That's a bit more than 1 mile. So this train is longer than 1 mile, and a train that long can easily span 3 countries in Europe. Well, obviously, if you cut a corner in the middle, but in Germany, I think the maximum length for a train is like under normal conditions about 800 meters, not 1 mile. And the fun thing is that we are going to move this train down the grade. We are first going uphill and then across the pass and then down. And driving uphill is quite boring and easy. And driving downhill, this is where the fun begins. So what do we do to set up our consist here? We have to insert our reverser. This is more or less the ignition key. We have to put the engine run to on. It has already been put to on. The generator field must be on, and this control switch must be on. So that is all set and done. Anything that we need to activate back here, the cap signals. Well, there is a switch where you can turn on the cap signals, but there are no cap signals here. I think this just switches on the alerter. The other stuff is already set up pretty much the way that we want it to be. Even the brakes have been released almost. Here on the screen you can see the status of the brakes. The brake pipe is already almost full. They did that actually because in the DLCs that came out before, people were annoyed because it took so long to release the brakes. And now they are almost fully released at the start of every service. So, without talking much longer, let's get this train to move, then I can explain more when we are on the move. The only thing that I want to set up before we start is the distance counter, because now we actually have a distance counter on this locomotive. We have to punch in the length of our train in feet. So this is 5,750. I don't add a margin of error because I will be slow activating it anyway. So now you can see this number has been taken up here, distance 5750, and later if we push the appropriate button, then it counts down this length so that we know when our train has run its own length. Independent brake is already full application. Let's just check if the brakes are set up correctly. This is all here in the screen. Independent brake is to lead, yes, that is okay. Auto brake is to fright, that is okay, it is cut in. We're controlling it from here. DP local, I don't think that we can change this, but it works. We need some more lights, we need bright and auxiliary, I think, so that we are allowed to go here even during the day. The fan, well, since it is hot. The DP local, DP means distributed power. That is that these locomotives that we have seen, all the 7 are actually sharing their power and acting as one big locomotive. This is what you need the distributed power for. The setting to local, I am not completely sure if there is a different setting. I don't think that you can change it. There is a button saying distributed power, but it does not work. So I would have thought distributed power local would allow you to distribute the power only among the locomotives that are actually coupled together, and the alternative where sharing it with the multiple units that are at the other end of the train and that are controlled with radio, but I don't know. At least this setting works here. Talking about the locomotives at the back, you have to set the banking com to on so that the radio transfers all the orders that you give to your locomotive to the end of the train. Unfortunately, I've gone all the way, so I need to move the camera back to the end of the train. Because what I wanted to show is that if you're looking through the window, you can actually see how those locomotives get remote controlled by our first locomotive. At the moment, there is everything at 0, just like we have this at the front. But we have set the banking com to on, so now those locomotives are supposed to copy what we are doing at the front here. Before we start, independent brake on. They even teach this in their tutorials now. Release the auto brake, and then you can see how the brake pipe fills. This is the brake pipe at the front end. It is almost at 90 psi is the maximum that we have on those freight trains, but you can see that the rear end of the brake pipe, this is where the other 3 locomotives are, it is just following slower, but also almost at 90. In the old DLCs, when you wanted to start a train like this, you had to wait for several minutes for the brake pipe at the rear end actually to fill. Now the brakes are released and we can start this consist. Just check all those switches are on. We have the banking com on so that the locomotives at the rear actually follow suit. We have our distance counter primed. We have the light on, so we can set the reverser to forward, and we can draw some power. Throttle to 2, then we can see that the locomotive is developing power here in the effort meter. Numbers are going up, and then we slowly release the independent brake. At the same time throttling up a bit, and then the locomotive starts rolling. Why do we do that? We do that our train does not roll backwards. We hold it in place with the independent brake up to the point where the propulsion from the engine take over and get the train moving. And as soon as the train is moving, we can actually throttle up. Don't throttle up too fast. Always leave like 1 second in between. And if we look back at the end of our train, we can see that the locomotives at the end have their lever at 5 as well. And as soon as we are moving our lever, the other locomotive follows suit. So they are fully remote controlled, coping whatever we're doing. So we are just operating this one locomotive, but all 7 locomotives are doing the same. That is the idea of distributed power. And so we have 7 times 4,400 horsepower, so that is more than 30k horsepower to move this train here. Speed limit wise, if we look at the profile, we can see at the moment we can go 35. There will be a section where the limit drops to 35 again, so I won't go much faster than 35, because this train is not a vehicle that you can speed up and slow down fast like a car. Both slowing down, speeding up takes ages. Now unfortunately we have gotten a lot of fog. I hope this is not the infamous fog bug that is haunting this DLC, that will never go away. Otherwise we won't see the nice scenery so much. But at any rate, we have to live with what we get. Those yellow signs here are the speed signs that was the alerter, that you can't really read so well, those speed signs, so you need to know where you want to be with your speed, at what point. And I think it is totally okay to check the pause screen for it, because in real life you would have a timetable where you could check this. You might remember the 14L rule that we talked about in the Caltrain stream. When approaching a level crossing, 2 long, 1 short and 1 long, starting 15 to 20 seconds before you reach the level crossing, and done including the bell until the loco has cleared the level crossing. I've actually found a table telling us how long you have to wait after you passed the Whistleboard, so that given or based on certain speeds you will start honking 15 to 20 seconds before the level crossing. Unfortunately I forgot it again, what was in the table, but we will have to make do without. Now we can actually read the speed signs very well, because the sun is not so intensive. It's not so intense. Unfortunately the fog prevents us to see the scenery better. So we are through that little bit where we are restricted to .35, limit went up to 40. I can activate the distance counter, what took me quite long. Unlike the Roadrunner, you cannot activate it with keyboard controls. That makes it a bit clumsy. And as soon as the distance counter, you can see it counting here, as soon as it gotten to 0, then we can accelerate beyond the 35. But first we have to wait for our train to pass, because at the moment the end of our train has not cleared the speed sign that allows us to go 40 instead of 35. So this is actually a lot of grain and steel. And you will see driving uphill, what we are doing at the moment is not so challenging, because you just put the throttle to max and let the train do what it can do. Whilst going downhill will be the fun part. Now we are running in an ascent, and you can see that the speed drops, so that I can actually throttle up fully. The distance counter has run down anyway, so we are in a part of the track where we can go 40, but we will most probably not be able to get to 40. Well, it really is a fun part, because you have to pay attention a lot on your brakes, on your speed. 1 or 2 or miles in difference in speed make huge difference in how you can control your train. The fun thing is that the locomotive is so loud on my headphones that I really have to shout, like I would have to shout when I drive this locomotive in real life. Yeah. Just imagine driving those locomotives several hours a day and always listening to this noise for hours and hours through the desert. I don't know if I'd want to do that in real life. Maybe once or twice a year, but every day. Yeah, that's the problem actually, not to fall asleep. This is why you have the alerter, alerting you every 30 seconds. Without the fog we could actually see that there is some sort of a plant over there. That was the alerter again. You might already have seen, yeah, the fog is nice, but it hides a lot of the scenery. And people have been reporting on the forums that when you drive those services at night and there is fog, you don't see nothing. Those signs that are fixed in a diagonal fashion to the posts, they are actually advanced warning signs to the speed boards, warning you that in, I think, 2 miles or whatever, this speed will be the relevant speed. You can see the signals are quite simple on those routes here. Often there is only just one signal head instead of 3, and so far we only got greens, clear signals. We will get some other signals at the end of the route, I think. And talking about signals, going back to the presentation, I will cut in 2 blocks with theory while we are driving uphill, and the first one is one that I wanted to insert at this point in time. We have had 2 streams with American signaling, one for Caltrain, one for the NORAC rules in the Northeast Corridor, and I wanted to throw a glance at the facts why there are so many different signaling systems in the United States, and yeah, why can't they unify their system, and what are the things that they have to make the same or do the same way in every signaling system. There is some sort of federal regulation in the United States concerning signals and indication, and you find that in the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 49, Subtitle B, Chapter 2, Section 236.23. And I will go through this text with you. Don't worry, we don't read everything, just the highlighted parts. And it tells us aspects on signals shall be shown by the position of semaphore plates, color of lights, position of lights, flashing of lights, or any combination thereof. So there is laid out that signals should be composed of lights, flashing, colored, position, and so on. We also have a provision concerning cap signals that tell us shall be shown by lights or by illuminated letters or numbers. So you can see here, this opens the possibility that that in a cap signaling system you don't get lights as aspects, but you get illuminated letters like in New York, or numbers like we had that in the Boston corridor, in the Northeast corridor in Boston. Each aspect displayed by a signal shall be identified by a name or shall indicate action. Here is let out the fact that every signal has an aspect, meaning the combination of colored lights, for example, and then this signal has a name, like clear or limited clear or approach, and then there should be an indication, like you can go on with line speed, or you shall reduce your speed, or you shall take care because the next signal will be a stop sign. And then for how those signals are composed, there is a fundamental provision for that. The fundamental indication of signal aspects shall conform to the following. A red light shall mean stop. So this is given by the federal regulations. Stop is red. You can't just say, okay, for my rail work I want a purple light with a pink unicorn indicating a stop. No, you have to use the red for a stop. Then they say a yellow light, a lunar light, or some other thingies should mean restricted speed, and stop may be required. So what we have here is the base for the yellow approach and for the lunar light that you often have in restricted or restricting signals. And a green light should mean you can proceed at authorized speed. So this red, yellow dash lunar and green is actually given in this text in the federal regulations. The rest is more or less up to the railroad companies, to the carriers. In F they say that the failure of a lamp or a signal light shall not result in a less restricting signal, for safety reasons obviously. So this is the base for the fact that we always applied that a dark signal should be treated as a red signal, because then it is safeguarded that the signal does not get a more favorable aspect or a favorable indication than it is actually meant to show. And then the names, indications and aspects of roadway and cab signals shall be defined in the carrier's operating rulebook and special instructions. And here is the connection where the federal regulations tell us this provision tells us that the aspects and so on are defined by the texts that are provided by the carriers. Your question, AJ, so what exactly do you do when encountering a black signal? If you encounter a totally black signal, you assume it to be a red signal, a stop signal. And then obviously you don't wait there until someone shows up and asks you what your train is actually doing here. You would call your signaler, you would try to find someone and you ask them. But first you act as if this signal is red, so you stop your train in front of the signal. And then you call someone and try to figure out if this is actually supposed to be a red signal, or if something broke and it is supposed to be green, or whatever. This is just a simple safety procedure. If you don't know what the signal means, assume the worst and then figure it out. Back to the operating rules and special instructions. We have seen that the actual way those signals are built, named, and what indications that they bear is up to the railway carriers within the fundamentals that are given in Part D of this section. And this results in a lot of different signal systems, because every carrier can have in their operating rulebook or special instructions their own signaling system. Because this is confusing and has led to confusion and accidents in the past, where drivers coming from one railroad to the other got confused because their signals all of a sudden meant different things. There are organizations of railroad carriers that try to get some unifications. One of those organizations is the NORAC that we have looked at in the Boston Sprinter stream, the Northeast Operating Rules Advisory Committee. A lot of big railroads are there, and they have their common operating rule book. And this is nice because the signal aspects, naming and indications are actually given in those rules. We have looked at it in the Boston Sprinter stream. They have even table where they tell us how those signals translate into cab signals and so on. And rules 280A and following give you all the necessary information about how the signals are supposed to be. They show you the possible aspects. Of course, they are different versions of the signals because railroads don't change their signals that they once built and that they are working, because obviously this costs a huge amount of money to build other signals. So all the old signals that have been placed during the decades, they are still in use. Those are the aspects, and then they tell us the name, clear, and the indication, proceed, not exceeding normal speed. So you have a catalog of those signals in the operating book for the NORAC rules. Another organization of that kind is the GCOR, the General Code of Operating Rules organization, and those are railroads that are not in the Northeast, but you can say something like west of Chicago. So all the west coast, west of Chicago, all the west coast railroads and the big railroads there, they are more or less in this GCOR organization. The problem with that is that the GCOR rulebook says in section 9.1 that the signal aspects and indications are shown in the special instructions of the railroad carriers. So again, we don't, unlike the NORAC rulebook, we don't have our signals in the rulebook, but it is referred further to the special instructions of the railroad carrier. So every railroad carrier within the GCOR has their own special instructions giving us the signals. So like we had Caltrain signals are different from Union Pacific Railroad signals, are different from what we have here, Burlington Northern Santa Fe BNSF rules. What the BNSF rules give us, we will look at later, but at the moment I just wanted to lay the ground for how those many different signaling systems in the United States work together and what is the regulatory base for them. Those are the things that you can ponder about when you're driving a 15,000 ton train through the desert uphill. Because the throttle is at 8, we are far away from the speed limit. There is not much for us to do at the moment. We can look out of the window. We can look at our locomotives. We can see that the number lights are only lit at the leading locomotives, what is totally correct. Only the first locomotive in the consist, the leading one, gets their lights on. So that everyone can see which one is the captain. Maybe I can use this time to explain a bit about the brakes here and the indicators for the brakes. All those numbers here tell us the status of the brake system in the locomotives and the train. And when I mean brake system, when I say brake system, I'm talking about the air brakes, the automatic brakes, and the most important thing is the brake pipe, BP, that tells us if our brakes are applied or not. If we have a pressure of 90 at front, 90 at rear, then the brakes are fully released, and as soon as we start applying them, then those numbers will drop. The more they drop, the more brakes we are applying. The BC is the brake cylinder, but only the one at the locomotive. That is at a 0. That means at the moment the brake cylinders are not applying any pressure to the wheels. If we apply the brakes, then these numbers will go up, they will increase and tell us that we are actually applying brake force to the wheels. But it is only the locomotive, not the cars. We will see this is a very important information, because when we are running downhill, we want to apply the air brakes only on the cars, not on the locomotives. So we will bail off the air brakes on our locomotive. We need it for the electric brake to work properly. The main is the main reservoir. This is where all the air is in stock, where we fill all the necessary parts. This number usually does not change in operation. If this number drops below the 130 that we have here, then we have a problem, because that means that we won't be able to operate our brakes properly anymore, and then we would have to stop the train and ask for maintenance. The flow meter, I think it is not really working. It is supposed to tell you how fast a pressure change in the brake pipe propagates from the front end to the rear end, but I don't think that it works on those locomotives. You can see that the velocity that we are traveling at is falling, because we are going uphill more and more in the incline, and we are far away from the limit of 50 that is allowed for us here. The rear is the same like here, brake pipe only at the rear. Another important thing is the effort meter here, that tells us how much force our driving motors are applying to the track. If this number gets too high, then you're getting a risk of wheel slips. If it is falling, then you can see that you're not applying any propulsion, and then your train will come to a standstill. There are other indicators here. You can see that there is actually a bell and a horn indicator. When you blow your horn, it lights up. When the bell is on, it lights up, so that even if you got deaf by all this noise on the locomotive, you can see that you're using your horn and your bell. Yeah, I influenced it at the beginning. When you are starting up your train from a cold locomotive, like activating it after it had been standing in the yard for some days, then this main reservoir will be empty, and it needs to be filled by the compressor that is run by the engine on the locomotive. So if you start the locomotive cold, then the main reservoir will be 0, and as soon as you start up the engine and apply some throttle, then this inflates, and the compressor is constantly holding this pressure in the main reservoir at a constant value of about 130, 140. And from this is where all the air in the other systems of the air brake system comes. This is why the pressure in the main reservoir is so high, because the air that is in there wants out, and as soon as we allow it to come out, then it goes into all the other compartments, into the brake pipe or in the auxiliary reservoirs at the wagons and cars, or at least in the end in the brake cylinders, if we want to apply the brakes. But those brakes are quite clumsy, the air brakes. They are great because they slow down and stop the whole train, so they're not working only on the locomotive, but also on the cars. But the problem is that as soon as you apply them, you cannot reduce the brake force that you once applied again. So if you apply them to 30%, then you are stuck with those 30%. You can only increase it but not decrease it unless you release them fully. And you can imagine what happens if you release fully your brakes when running downhill with 15,000 tons of steel and grain. Then it will pick up speed quite fast. So running releases when going downhill with heavy trains like this is something that usually is not allowed for you to do. We will talk about this later when we're actually grading at the pass. But you are in a dilemma. You have to apply those air brakes because otherwise you won't be able to slow down your train. And the other thing is, if you apply them too hard, then you can't get rid of them anymore, even if the gradient lessens and you want to go faster and your brakes are slowing you down too much. So there is a system actually how you apply just as much air brake as necessary when going downhill. At the moment we don't need them at all because we are going uphill. The other very important or crucial important brake system is the dynamic brake or electric brake. I think it is usually called dynamic brake on American engines. This is not an air brake and it only works on the locomotives. And those diesel electric locomotives work in a way that you have a diesel engine running in the locomotive and they generate electric current, and this electric current is used to turn the wheels with electric motors. That is the general principle of diesel electric locomotives. And if you turn around the polarity of these motors, then you can use the turning wheels to turn the motors to generate electric current. So you reverse the process. You don't use electric current in the motors to turn the wheels, but you use the turning wheels to generate electric current in the motors. And this process slows down the wheels because you draw the energy out of the wheels and out of the drains. And this is in principle how the dynamic brakes work. But this works only on the locomotives, not on the cars. And you have to balance the dynamic brakes with the air brakes to get a train like this down the grade safely. And the dynamic brakes, the advantage of that, the dynamic brakes is definitely that you can adjust them just as you need them. You can apply them and you can reduce them and you can reapply them freely. Not with the air brakes where you are stuck with the setting that you have and you can only increase but never release until you release them fully. The indicator here that is green will turn to yellow when we're using the dynamic brakes. And then the number that is shown here will show us the effort of the dynamic brakes. So the idea when we are grading, I can tell you this up front, is that we are coming to the pass and then we are going from a ascent into a descent. Instead of running uphill, we will be going downhill. With that long train, obviously, as soon as the locomotive is across the grade, the center of mass of the train will still be on the other side where we were coming from. So we will still need to apply power to get the train across the pass. But as soon as the center of gravity is across the pass, then the train will pick up speed all by its own. And this is something that you need to balance out when you're grading. You have to slowly reduce the effort that you are putting into your train, and then you have to slowly apply brakes to slow it down. And the way they teach you to do that in the tutorials here, and that works fine in this DLC with those heavy trains. I've already run 2 or 3 services across the pass, so my experience is a bit limited, but it worked fine the 2 or 3 times that I tried it, is that you apply the dynamic brakes, the electric brakes, to the maximum, and then you apply the air brakes on top of the dynamic brakes. Always, I can't stress this enough, always bailing off the air brakes on the locomotives, because as soon as the brake cylinders in the locomotives are filled with air, as soon as the air brakes on the locomotives are activated, then the dynamic brakes are turned off. Not in an emergency brake. This is forbidden to turn them off in an emergency brake, since a heavy or a really bad train disaster that happened on this route, going down from this pass to San Bernadino. After that, in an emergency brake application, the dynamic brakes are still working. But if you're not in an emergency application, you will see that later, and maybe I can demonstrate. As soon as you forget to bail off the brake cylinders in your locomotives, then the dynamic brakes will lose their effect, and then you brake less actually than without the air brakes that you applied. So the best effort for the combined brake force of dynamic brakes and air brakes you can get when you bail off your brakes at the locomotives, so that the locomotives brake with a dynamic brake and the cars brake with the air brake. Well, everybody who has run a service like this in the simulator knows what I am talking about, but you can still read a lot of people on the forums saying, why are the dynamic brakes not working? Why are the brakes not enough when the train is running down? It only works if you combine both brake systems and combine it in a way that they are actually working together. One reason why this terrible train disaster that I was talking about happened was that one of the engineers, the one on the rear locomotives, obviously applied an emergency brake application at a certain point, and thus rendered all the dynamic brakes in the train useless, and the train tried to slow down from a speed that was already too fast with its air brakes only, and this could not end well, because the energy that this train has when it runs downhill with a speed that is too high is so immense that it actually melts the brakes. It melts the wheels, it melts the brakes, and then they are rendered completely useless. With those passing trains, you can actually see how long they are. This is a scary thought, yeah. If you watch documentaries about this train disaster, those engineers were going down the grade, and then all of a sudden they realize our brakes are not working. The train is picking up speed up to a point where it reached a speed where the speedometer was at its end. The speed climbed to 90 miles, and then the speed meter could not indicate a faster speed anymore. And just imagine sitting in a runaway train like this, having no clue why this happened, and not being able to slow down your train. All you can do is phone ahead and warn everyone that is in the vicinity of the track to get out of the way. And from what you can read, the problem with this disaster was that the engineer was given a wrong information about how heavy his train was. The train was presumably actually much heavier than the engineer was told. And the engineer did his calculations, and he knew that some of the dynamic brakes on the locomotives in the consist did not work, but according to the figures that he had been given, it was still enough. But since the train was actually much heavier, the dynamic brakes were not enough to control it. Seems oh yeah, there were fatalities. Some of the crew and the train actually derailed coming into San Bernadino in a curve to the right. I think we are actually going through this curve, and the train more or less knocked down a whole street, or the houses in the whole street. It was especially disastrous because during the cleanup, most probably they damaged a gas pipeline, and a couple of days later they had a huge gas explosion on top of everything. Yes. This is one of the things that are connected in my brain, or hardwired in my brain, with Cajon Pass. And when DTG proclaimed that they will have the Cajon Pass in the Train Sim World 3, I was thinking, okay, since we are seeing some signals here, I think it is time for the second block of additional information about how the signals are actually working in the system of BNSF. So this is where we are, BNSF, special route signals. Since I do not have the special instructions of BNSF, I am confined to the sources that I can find on the internet. You can find some sources, and then you try to corroborate what one source says with what the other says, and I think then you can find a quite decent picture. From what we have learned, two things must be the same in every signaling system. The green one must say line speed clear, the red one must say stop 0, and there must be some signal that tells you to restrict your speed. So this is the baseline what we have in every signaling system, and let's see how BNSF dealt with this. BNSF, they have the yellow approach. That is so commonplace. I think this is the same in every signaling system in the United States. A single yellow on top of it always tells you next signal will be red. It is not always the same what it indicates. Here it indicates you have to slow down to 30. The star is there because there are some trains that are exempt from that. They can slow down to 40, but this is not our story here. As soon as you see or pass a yellow signal, you have to slow down to 30, or no, even better, pass this signal with 30, because you're approaching a stop. Restricted is maximum 20. That means you have to drive so that you can always stop if there is an obstacle on the track. In front of the obstacle, maximum 20 miles. And the signals that order you to go restricted can be like this, or can be like this, or can be like that. Those three things we know. The flashing yellow we know from the Caltrain system. This is the restricted from Caltrain signaling. The lunar we have seen in the NORAC rules is a typical sign for a restricted speed. Every time you see a white signal, you should think this is restricting you to restricted speed. And then this signal red with a number plate, we know that from the NORAC rules, where it is set out as a stop and proceed. You have to stop and then you can go on with restricted. Here it is a restricted. You don't have to stop in front of it, you can just go on with restricted speed. Then in the BNSF system you have actually two signals that are approach restricted signals. You don't have this in every signaling system, but BNSF has it. And we see the common principle for approach signals. You always put the yellow on top of the signal that would denote the signal that is announced. Like the yellow on a red announces a red, the yellow on a flashing red or the yellow on a lunar white announce a restricted. So we have heard maybe that BNSF does not use speed signaling. This is why we don't have the categories limited and medium and slow as we have it in the NORAC system or in the Caltrain system even. But this signal that we learned in the Caltrain or NORAC system as being an approach limited, it exists in the BNSF system. And it is even called approach limited. But the funny thing is, there is no limited clear signal in the system. The signal just tells you approach the next signal, whatever it is, with not faster than 60. And this is the same with this. That looks like an approach medium if you look at it with our eyes that have been schooled in the NORAC system or in the Caltrain system. But it is called, funny enough, an advanced approach. Usually we would see that in the left column, right? And a signal that announces an approach signal, and that tells us that the second signal after the advanced approach is red. Not so here. It is called an advanced approach, but actually it is a signal that tells us to not go faster than 50 at the next signal, whatever it may be. The same here, what looks like, if we look at it with NORAC eyes or with Caltrain eyes, especially when we look at the left one, looks like an approach slow, is called approach medium here. There is no signal corresponding it, no clear signal, but it tells you not go faster than 50 at the next. So you can see there is a speed signaling aspect in the BNSF system, what is actually a route signaling system, but it does not have the corresponding clear signals that would tell you to go a certain speed category from this point. But we have the approach signals, and they tell you to approach the next signal with a certain speed, whatever this signal might be. I said BNSF is a route signaling system. Why is that? Because we have some signals that have additional to their information that we have here, that they carry. They have the information that you are going across a switch away from the main line, that you are diverging. So these signals where the green one is shifted downwards, 1 or 2 positions even, it tells you you have a clear signal, you can proceed with line speed, but you will diverge, you will be going across a switch. So go with line speed, the line speed that is appropriate for the switch and for the diverging line, and then you are clear. So this is an indication that we did not have in our speed signaling system, that the signal is telling you you are diverging and then you are clear. And this effect we have for a couple of signals in this system here, like here. The approach medium tells you to not go faster than 50 at the next. Then there is a diverging variant where you put this flashing yellow one step down, and it tells you you are diverging now, you are going across the switch, and then approach the next one with not more than 35. So here's actually a difference between 40 and 35. Again, the start, because some of the trains are exempt from it, they can go 40, but the same system. This signal, moving down the flashing light one step in the signal, gives you the additional information that you are diverging now, and then you should not go faster than 35 when you get to the next signal. Same here, diverging approach. Approach aspect, move down one step, tells you you are diverging now, and then you are running up to a red signal. Same thing like with the approach signal, you have to slow down to 30 unless you are one of the trains that are exempt from it and can go 40. And then we have a funny signal here, that is one that has the information about the diverging without there being any signal that has the same indication without the diverging information, because this is an diverging approach diverging. It means that you are diverging now, and on the next signal you will be diverging again. We don't have a corresponding signal for that because we usually do not have an approach clear signal, because an approach clear signal does not make a lot of sense. You usually have a clear signal then in front of the other clear signal. Only if you diverge, then it makes sense that people tell you you will diverge now, and at the next signal you will diverge again. Cab signals. These are the roadside signals, and you can find some documents telling you how they translate to cab signals. We don't have cab signals in our locomotive here. In the Sherman Hill DLC we have a machine that tells us cab signals. It is not working so super great, and a lot of people say they are completely broken, what is probably true, but you can actually see what they are supposed to look like. You have like a circle and an upper and a lower half, and the upper and the lower half can have these different colors. And then you just have to look how they translate, how the roadside signals translate into cab signals, because that is the main idea of cab signals, that they pick up the indication of the road signal, and the driver can always look at it so that he doesn't forget what the last signal told him, and that those signals can change in between fixed signals. How do they translate? The clear translate to a full green. That is the only one that translates to a full green. On the other end of the scale we have the restricting, that results in a red over yellow, and this is the problem with the signals, the cab signals in the Sherman Hill DLC, that you always get a red over yellow, and that you're always restricted all the time, even though you have clear wayside signals. And this is obviously not the way it is supposed to be. If you should be so unlucky to run a red signal, then you will have not a full red signal, because you're not supposed to run a signal. That's why it does not make any sense to have a full red signal put into the in-cab signaling system. So you will have the same red over yellow. And then the approaches get the full yellow. And this is the normal approach, this is the diverging approach, and this the approach restricted. They will be yellow. And all the rest will get this yellow over green. The diverging clear, as well as the diverging approach diverging, as well as the advanced approach, as well as the approach medium and the diverging approach medium. They all have this. So from this cab signal alone you can't tell. You have to refer to the wayside signal. All that this yellow over green tells you is that you are not running under a full green. And this, I don't know. If you look into the tables for that, you don't find a signal that translates. The approach limited does not translate into any. So it is not defined, obviously. Probably on the lines where they use those approach limited signals, they don't use cab signals. That is my only explanation that I can offer, but this is only an assumption. That is our first route signaling system. And I hope I managed to get over or to make clear the point that in signals of that kind there is this additional information that you are diverging on top of the other information that you can get from the signal. Back to our train, still running uphill. Do you still like the fork, HA? So you did not fall asleep during my explanations of the signaling system. That is great. Well, now there are no more explanations. Now there is just simple train driving. Whoops, I was too close. I hope I can manage this to let the whole train pass without running into any penalty brake application or whatever. Just to give you the impression of how long this consist is. It is still running and still running and still running. I really hope there is not any adverse signal indication. The problem is if I switch back into the cab, then I cannot switch back to this point here anymore. Because the free camera position is deleted. Is there the end incoming? I'm getting more and more anxious what the cab might do. And there are the locomotives. You see, our train is so long that we get a loading screen to switch back to the front. 50. Speed limit is not our problem. Yeah. How do you get a slight idea of how much air brakes you will have to apply when running downhill? There is a simple rule of thumb that I figured, or that I'm using. I don't know if that is common knowledge, probably it is. Obviously you can always divide the weight of your train through the horsepower that is pulling, or the other way around, so that you can have a ratio between horsepower and mass of the train. Here actually in this DLC it is quite easy, because you have locomotives of the same type. We have 7 times the same locomotive. So what you can do is look at this figure that is given here in the pause screen, telling you your train is about 14.3 tons in weight, and then you divide it through the number of locomotives that you have, and the more this figure ends up to be higher than 2, the harder it will get for braking. So if it is about 2 or a bit above 2 or 2000, I always leave away the 1000, then you will need a normal amount of brakes. If you get a ratio of 3 or 4, then you should not run the train, because then even with brakes fully applied, you won't be able. So just take the weight, divide it by the number of locomotives, and 2 is a good number. 2.2 still works, but the higher it gets, the harder it will be to brake that train. There is another one, an intermodal train coming on. You see, we had in the Dresden DLC with the PZBM stream, we had flatbeds with 1 container on top of it, and here in the United States they put 2 of those containers on top of each other. Wouldn't work in Germany. And why would it not work, AJ? Any idea? Well, obviously, because we have the overhead catenary in most parts in Germany, and those stacked containers would hit the overhead catenary. Well, it is quite obvious there is no room for stacking 2 containers on top of each other. Otherwise, the overhead catenary must be so high that the locomotives would need a pantograph that looks like the neck of a giraffe. It does not comply with the Lichtraumprofil. So again, back to my table. A normal amount of brakes is like 60% or something like that. 60% air brakes plus the dynamic brakes for a ratio of 2.2 that we have here. But we will see that as soon as we are grading. I will set this out. When I apply them. The problem obviously is if you have to apply more than 60% of your air brakes, then you probably won't be able to get the train out of the descent at the bottom of it without a running release. The scenery is great with the fog. Now we're actually getting to the pass, I think. So what I'm going to do here is I will reduce the speed so that I have enough room to apply the brakes. So the idea is we are aiming for a speed of 30 miles when we're running downhill. But obviously when I'm going across the grade with 30 miles, the problem is as soon as I am figuring out how much brake force I need, during this time the train will accelerate. This is why I slow down to like 20 when grading, so that after that I have a margin of 10 miles during which I can adjust my brakes. And in this curve we actually went across the summit, I think, and most part of the train is still on the other side. It will slow down the train if I reduce the throttle, as you can see. Reducing the throttle results in the train slowing down. And I want it to slow down to like 20. And go across the grade with 20, and then when the train is in the descent and picks up speed, I start applying my brakes. But this requires watching the speed closely. I don't want to slow the train down too fast or too much. So you always have to look at your speed clock and see, is the train picking up speed because the center of gravity is across the grade, or is it still being slowed down because the center of gravity is still on the other side of the grade? And this needs to be balanced with the throttle. And at a certain point you will see that there is some kind of an equilibrium, and then the train is starting to pick up speed. And then you need your dynamic brakes ready. Not quite sure where the level crossing is here. So the grading is obviously a process that needs a lot of balance on the throttle, on the brakes, and I guess experience if you want to do this in real life. So kudos to all the train drivers who have done this and still doing this in real life, balancing 15,000 tons of steel and coal or metal or... And now it is picking up speed. You can see that the train is accelerating even though the throttle is at 0, and that means I can set up the electric brakes. I need to wait 10 seconds. The throttle needs to be in 0 position for 10 seconds, but I think that was already done. And now you can see that the effort meter got yellow, and it's already starting to apply some brake force. and we are yanking this up quite heavily now. And we see how long we can actually keep the speed to 20 or 21 with the electric brakes alone, with the dynamic brakes alone. And as soon as we get to the point where we can no longer control the speed with the dynamic brakes, then we will add air brakes to the dynamic brakes. See, at the moment it is still a bit at an equilibrium, but I know that when we're going down this diverging track here, then the train will start picking up speed like it is doing now. Again, no idea where this level crossing is. Well, what definitely is the idea is that you rather go too slow and then pick up some speed on the way down, as opposed to being too fast, because slowing down a train like this in the descent is a horror, obviously. Now the dynamic brakes are at their full and the train is picking up speed. We are at 23 and it will climb even more, so it makes sense to apply some air brakes. And you can see that the brake pipe numbers are going down to 83, but we are still not slowing down, so we need more. And I always bail off my brake cylinders on the locomotive, so that the dynamic brakes don't lose their effect. If at the moment the air brakes are too much, you can always release the dynamic brakes again, so that the train does not get too slow. So you do the fine-tuning with the dynamic brake and the heavy appliance with the air brake. Probably still not enough. Yeah, full dynamics. I think 75 to 73 in the brake pipe is about what we will have to go to. Again, another level crossing that you cannot really see where it is. Let's just assume it is here. And as soon as you have your equilibrium and enough air brake, then you slowly get your speed closer to the 30. But I honestly never go faster than 27 here. Because I need to see when the train is picking up speed. And if you're going with 30 line speed, and it snaps to 31, then you have already been speeding and you have no time to react. So I don't want to go faster than 27 miles. I'm now at the brake pipe pressure of 74. I think I will try to use that. Rather reduce the dynamic brake until we get into a harder gradient, into a steeper descent. You can see even with the air brakes at about 60%, brake pipe pressure of 74, we are still picking up speed with the dynamics at 6. But this is what you do. You look at your speed clock and how it is reacting, and then you play around with the brakes. And if you feel comfortable enough, you can let the speed climb 1 mile more. Like I want to go to 27, now I'm at 25. I think I'm quite comfortable with what the train is doing. So I might allow it to go to 27. But always keeping in mind, as soon as the train starts running away, there is probably no way to stop it again. Nevertheless, I allow it to climb to 27 now. So it is at 27, 1 notch more on the dynamics. And so you can have a quite steady speed even when running downhill. .28 is too much. I wanted to go back to 27. If it does not react, more. If, yeah. Soon as it reacted, you can switch it down a notch. If it is getting too slow, reduce the dynamics. One notch at a time. But you can already see it. The grade is not always the same. The gradient drops and rises. And now I have no way to reduce my air brakes. I can only fasten them even more. Yeah, and this is really fine-tuning. I have no idea how that feels in real life, obviously. People say that the physics are totally different from real life. But to be honest, I enjoy this fine-tuning and this great battling, because if you don't do it in a sensitive fashion like we are doing it here now, then your train will always run away. You have to apply a lot of brakes to slow it down again, and then the train will almost stall, and then it will run away again. So you will have not a speed line like this, like hugging the speed limit, but you will have a speed line that is jumping over, falling under, jumping over, falling under all the time. So the appeal in what we are doing here is to really control the speed with 15,000 tons of steel and grain pushing you downwards. In an old documentation for the sand patch grade, one of the core routes of the Terrain Sim World 2, I read that at certain parts of the grades you use power braking, what means that you do not release your air brakes, but you are actually applying throttle while your train is being braked. So you're actually working with your locomotive against the train brakes, something that the game does not want you to do here. They always tell you to release the brakes first before applying throttle, but actually sometimes it can make sense. Just imagine you're running down a grade and you have your air brakes applied, and then there is a short section in the track where the grade lessens and it is almost level for a mile or two, and after that it goes downhill very steep again. So the problem is, if you release your air brakes for this level part in between, then you might not have the time to get them back ready to apply them as soon as the grade picks up again. If you don't apply throttle, then your train may stall because of the applied air brakes in this level mile. So the solution obviously is to apply throttle against your brakes to get your train across this part. And this is why it was obviously allowed under certain special conditions to do it. Power braking. You could see that we actually got a little wheel slip. The white light in the bottom left corner lights up when the wheels lose the contact with the track and start turning. And this can happen with the dynamic brake as well, just as it can happen when you're applying traction force. This is a part of the track with a bit of a lesser gradient, so if you actually need to do a running release of your air brakes, then this would probably be a spot to do it, because you can see that the speed limit is going up a bit, and so probably then you can catch your train again. But if you look at the gradient, it is still going downhill, so as soon as you release your air brake, your train will start running away. what we can see is, as soon as we are with our train beyond the speed change, then we can slowly increase our speed from 30 to 35, meaning we will increase our speed from 27 to 32, but not before the train has passed the speed sign. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is that the faster the train goes downhill, the more energy is needed, the more brake force is needed to keep the train from accelerating further. What seems a bit absurd, because if you're going down a grade with 30 miles, you need to brake not as hard as if you're going down the same grade with 50 miles. So you have to brake harder the faster you go. So now we are beyond the change in speed limit. I will just turn off the e-brakes for a while, and you can see how fast the train is picking up speed. Just put them in setup and just let the train, as soon as the gradient picks up again, accelerate to 32 into the new limit, because that is the limit that we have starting there. So, even though we still have our air brakes on 59%, almost 60%, brake pipe pressure of 74, we are still picking up speed. Very slowly, but we are still picking up speed as soon as we reduce the dynamics. And this is exactly the way we want it. We use the air brakes to get us into a position where we can fine-tune the speed of the train with the dynamic brakes. The faster the speed is going up, the more brake force you might want to apply, and if you stall the increase in speed, then rather reduce it again and not be too late on the brake. Whistleboard with 30. I think this was 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. And here you can actually see the level crossing for a change. I will have to check later when I rewatch the video how good I hit the 15 to 20 seconds before getting to the level crossing mark. Again, I am aiming for the 32. And you can see I'm powering up the dynamics, and it takes a while for the speed to react. Can't leave my cab for too long because I have to keep an eye on the speed clock. It looks quite far from outside, doesn't it? Fast, not far. As soon as the speed clock goes up one tick, I go up one notch with the dynamics. If the speed does not go back to 32, another notch and another notch, and as soon as it reacts, down one notch to reduce the brake force to hold instead of reducing speed. To be honest, I can understand people who say this is a boring endeavor here, what you're doing on your computer game. Running down a train like this for an hour. But I find this extremely calming and relaxing. And challenging. It is challenging at the same time. Another speed change, and we can go to 40 if we want. Means 37 for us. As soon as the train passed the dividing line. To be honest, I forgot to use the distance counter because it is a bit clumsy to use. So I will just check on the pause screen at what point our train is beyond. And we can gain more speed. But from the experience that I got in my 2 or 3 rides down this grade that I did so far, you might not want to go faster than 40 maybe. Because then it actually gets difficult to control the speed. Yeah, I think we got the fog bug. If we don't have the fog bug, then we are extremely unlucky that we have fog all the time in our dynamic weather. But well, there are those days when the fog just does not lift. It looks great with the fog. It just gets maybe a bit dull if you always gaze into the fog. And it would be great for storytelling reasons if the fog could be lifted as soon as you are at the bottom of the pass. And you can look up to the mountains in clouds and fog. But I have a feeling in San Bernardino it will be just as foggy and misty as it is up here. By the way, it's not that far anymore, it's 10 miles. And if you look at the profile, it is going down, 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 down. We are across the speed divide, so we can actually go to 37. Yeah, Chile, I know. You have to wait a bit more. This is really a long, 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 long service. Because there was a level crossing. You might have seen this sign with a W on it, a whistleboard, that orders me to honk. And sometimes you can see the level crossings because there is actually some part of a road. Sometimes it seems to be only some kind of a dirt track that is a level crossing. But I honk anyway. If there is a sign ordering me to honk, then I honk. So there is another reduction to 40, so this is why we stay at 37, that we do not spin speed in the track ahead. But you see, you have to plan your velocity up ahead. There is no way in just reacting to the speed signs as they are put next to the track. There's some highway bridge. Never leave the speedometer out of your eyes for too long. But with all those highway bridges, we are already out of the proper pass area, where there is nothing but the dirt track. We have civilization around here. How are we doing speed-wise? Everything okay? Maybe we can allow ourselves the 38, but not the 39. Can see the grading and it is picking up again. Not necessarily at the point where we are with the locomotive, but where the center of gravity, the train center of gravity is. See, I went up like 6 notches on the dynamics and we are still not slowing down. Maybe we need a bit more air brakes on this part. Now we are slowing down. We don't need more air brakes. Are we through this? No, we're not through this. After that we actually have a speed limit of 55, but we are not going 55 with this train. When we're going 55 we need so much in air brakes that we can almost apply them full. Gradient is lessening a bit. We're still not through. Are we through? Okay, now I let the speed climb to 42, but this is, I think, max. I will not allow more. 40 or 42. I think in real life you would have very, very specific instructions how fast you can go with the train on what part of the grade. Let's see if we can control it at 42. Did you ever wonder what those D signs are? There are like, look like little switches with a stick and a D sign on top of it, a circular plate with a D. Those are derails. In case of an emergency you can use it. Oh, you can actually to kick a train off the track so that it doesn't do any more harm. We are running in a signal and the flashing yellow on top of a red says it's a medium approach. mustn't go faster than 40 at the next signal. Okay, so good thing that we just accelerated. Let's see if we can slow down those two clicks with the dynamics, or if we can't. What you see up ahead is not the next signal, because they are signals from the back that are valid for the other side, if I am not mistaken. So we actually cannot slow down with full throttle dynamic brakes. So I will have to apply a bit more air brakes. And still there is no slowing down, but this is exactly what I meant before. Oops, wrong button. If you're going faster, you need much more brakes to keep your speed steady. So come on, slow down this one click. Yeah, now we made it back down to the 40. And remind me to not go faster than 40 anymore. And now we got the problem, we have the increased air brakes and can't release them. We have to live with them now. I wonder which of those bends is the bend where the disaster happened. We must be getting there soonish. Alright, this is an approach. We have to reduce our speed to 30 as soon as possible, meaning even more air brakes. Never forget to bail off your Loco brake cylinders. And we need to be prepared to stop our train at the next signal. So we cannot obviously go very fast. With a train like this, running up to a red signal. No idea how this is done in real life, how slow they go. This more or less results in a restricted speed, right? Because you have to be able to stop at the signal. But in real life, engineers would know where the next signal is, and I don't, because I don't know the route that well. But I think slowing down to 20 should give us the opportunity to slow down the train. So I'm out with the dynamics. Let's see if we're still slowing down further. If we are slowing down further, then, well, yeah, you can see it in the gradient. There's no way to make a running release here, right? And they gave us an approach here in this gradient. Thank you very much. Well, we will be picking up speed again, I'm quite sure, because there's a little step in the track where the gradient always gets level, and then after that it picks up again, as you could see that in the diagram there, and our center of mass needs to get out of the level and into the gradient, and then it will start pushing us again. But running under yellow, you can't really go faster than that here. This might actually be a situation for power braking, to pull your train across this step, so that you don't lose too much momentum. But you can see left of the line where we are, there is a gradient. And doing a running release here can't be great. But if I try to apply power here, the game will remind me that I should not do that. See? But I can do it. So power braking still works, even if the driver assistant tells you that this is not how you're supposed to do it. Yeah, without the fog we might actually be able to see our signal, so that we can, well, the gradient comes to an end there. So probably we might be able to make a running release then. So if the train is not picking up speed from the gradient anymore, then I will just release. Yeah, it doesn't. Then I will release the air brakes, and when doing so, when doing a running release in a gradient, you should always consider applying the dynamics first to the max, so that you can cushion the acceleration that results in the running release. And the dynamics are actually good enough to hold the train. Maybe they are. You can see this beast is picking up speed, and we are supposed to be able to stop at the next signal. No way, bro, I have to apply some air brakes again. Because even if the gradient is not as severe anymore, it is still enough to push us beyond the maximum of our dynamics. And this obviously does not comply with the indication that we should be able to stop at the next signal. Without the approach signal, I might consider just let the train go. But since we are still running under yellow, we have to expect the next signal to be red, and so we have to be prepared to get this train to a stop. Now we hit the mission marker. This game is new, yes, it has been released just a couple of days ago, at least in the third version. The first version has been around for a couple of years. So, we are prepared to stop at the next signal in case it is still red, but hoping that it changed to a more favorable aspect in the meantime. And can we see? We can see the signal, but we cannot see what it is showing. It is a red. It is red, so we have to stop. And we have no way of getting this train to a stop. Are you still with me, AJ? Well, that is disappointing, but you see, you cannot be too careful with grading when there is a red signal at the end. What would have been the better choice? I should have known where the signal is and have slowed down even more to be able to get the train to a stop at the signal, because obviously even from a slow speed that we had, it takes forever to get the train to a stop. Well, so this stream ends after 2 hours and 13 with a SPADout, the first on my stream, and well, maybe not the last, but this all teaches you cannot be careful enough if you're running under yellow aspects. Thank you for watching, thank you for moderating, AJ, and see you next time. Take care.